Okay. Just checking. I'll be on in a moment here. It looks like no one's watching right now. Even if no one watches, that's fine. I'll just save the video. But this was the only time I worked till 11, so this was the only time I could do it. So I'll be right back here. Hey, whoever's here, welcome. Give me one moment. Just setting up a couple things. Harry, dude, check this. I'm going bald. I just noticed for the first time the other day while I was trying to do a video. So that's disappointing. I now have to like get my hair buzz cut, or it's clear that I'm balding at the top. So that's a disappointment. So yeah, what I'm trying to do here is I want to do some of these live streams just to get an idea for what I'm doing. That way I should have a new camera and mic coming here in a week or two. So hopefully by that point then I'm ready to go, where I could be able to set up like one consistent day where I'm doing live streams, and then I'll just do videos, probably like 4 or 5 videos a week other than that. So that's the plan. So I can't, because I'm at a different location, I have to use my phone as a hotspot. I got some like program. I was going to use my phone as a recording device for image at least, and it's way clearer than my webcam here. So the last video I did, it came out way better, I thought, the image. But I can't figure out how to use the program while I'm using my phone as a hotspot, since I don't have the internet. So that's why it's going to be grainy today. But I wanted to try a couple things while I do this video. It'll probably only be like a half an hour, so maybe a little longer. But I wanted to try like creating highlights and thumbnails and things like that. So just bear with me when I do that. But I still am going to have actual content of stuff that I was talking about. So okay. Hey, any of you clearly awesome 2 people that are watching, everyone can hear me and everything all right? I'm hoping. I'll type that, because if you can't hear me, how would you know? Okay, good. All right, so the stuff I had to talk about today is, the first I wanted to talk about Veterans Day. It's almost the end of it now, obviously, but yeah, what a great day. I think that veterans are awesome people. Now, I'm sure you've been hearing it all day. If you're on social media or anything, everyone's been reminding you. And hopefully if you watched any sporting events or things of that nature or anything on television, people have been talking about it as well. So that's a good thing. I think it's good to honor our veterans. But I think that there's more than just honoring them one day a year and just, if you see someone in public telling them you're proud of their service, which I do think that's important, and that could change an individual vet's day. I'm sure it feels great to have people let you know how thankful they are. So, but I think that we need to go a step further than that. I used to be more cynical, right? Like I had this problem of how do you honor veterans if you don't like the wars that they're fighting in currently at the time? And like, for example, I was against the Iraq War. I was against, like, interventions in Libya, Afghanistan, things of that nature. So, it seems at first glance difficult to honor the troops that are over there, but still dislike the fact that they're over there in the first place. But it's easy once you're not a naive child like I was, it's easy to just realize that it's not their fault at all, right? Like, it's constantly the people that send them there. If it was up to these soldiers, I'm sure they'd be rather at home, protecting the country at home and things of that nature instead of having these expansive wars. But the nature of signing up for the military is you have to do what's ordered. So it was easy for me to then understand that you can honor the soldiers, honor veterans, and still dislike some of the wars that they go to and things of that nature. And even aside from those wars, the military, even in today's day and age, is still massively important to us, right? It's important for our defense. It's important to project democracy and our values across the world. I don't mean it's like a kind of a soft power thing, right? Like you don't have to be going over there with guns to get your point across. The fact that countries know that you could theoretically you have a mighty military, hopefully is enough to be a deterrent where you won't ever have to use it. So there's that level of it. I think, though, that the way I try to honor the troops is what I would do, what I argue for and try to discuss to people like maybe on this channel or before this channel with people that just I'm talking to in real life or on other websites like Above Top Secret that I'm on or something like that. And that is, I think the best way to honor the troops is to encourage policies and vote for policies that will stop them being sent to all these ridiculous situations, right? Like, we think of Veterans Day, it's easy to think of, like, World War I and II or Vietnam and these 1 and 2. Let's stick with that, for example. And, like, the wars prior to that. Like, it's easy to think of, like, the importance of that, the heroism. Now, obviously, we know that in other wars, regardless of what it was, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, there's heroism and stuff as well. But we tend to talk about the horrors of, like, those wars, trench warfare in World War I and, like, the Holocaust in World War II and all the terrible stuff they saw. But I think there's a unique we're seeing something that's kind of unique with soldiers of my generation or younger, which have fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, and places like that. They're now kind of not just soldiers, they're also trainers, right? So, for example, take Afghanistan. If you're a soldier that's sent over there, you have to train the people of Afghanistan that are theoretically going to fight Al-Qaeda or whatever terrorist group after you leave. That was the idea. Now, what's it, over 10 years, we're still there. It's way more than that, right? Like 15 years or something, we're still in Afghanistan. But, like, one of the unique horrors of that situation, I think, is you're training people during the day that very well may be your enemy at night. And, like, when we talk about things like PTSD and things of that nature, I can't imagine the mental toll that just fighting in a war would take. Anyone who's ever done that or that signed up and that could be a possibility is a better person than me. Like, that's incredible courage and strength to be willing to do something like that. But then on top of that, right, is the idea that, like, at least like in World War I and World War II, you had the idea of your allies were your allies, right? Now, the way warfare is fought, you could be training someone who's secretly at night going back and working for Al-Qaeda and things of that nature, which makes it even worse. So I think that we need to remember that. And when we think of the veterans, think of like how terrible those situations were. Even if they weren't injured in combat or ever saw combat, like they signed up for that. And that's something that could have happened. Now, one caveat, that doesn't mean that, like, someone who's a soldier can't be a jerk in real life. Like, yeah, I've known people like that too, but you still honor the service that they had. And cynical people say, oh, they did it for money or they did it for status or this and that. It doesn't matter. they did something that I wasn't capable of doing and I didn't have the courage to do, and so that should be commended, and I do commend that. But again, I think the best way to commend that is to be able to say that you need to do stuff in your real life to support like people, such as going out and meeting veterans that you might know and letting them know how important their service was, helping them if they need help, just letting them talk to you if they need that, supporting organizations that help veterans and things of that nature. And even if you can't do any of that, which you probably are able to do at least some of that, because a lot of that doesn't require any money, but even aside from all of that, I think as a policy, we should vote for people that seek to bring those troops home. The nature of military conflicts are far different than it used to be, right? It seems that we're making this huge mistake where every year we say we need to invest more money in the military. And when they talk about, you'll sometimes hear this misnomer. It's a very clever trick that is played, right? Well, they'll say like, oh, Obama cut military spending by 20%. He didn't actually cut the amount he gave to the military. He cut the increase that he was going to give them by 20%, right? Now, this seems like an odd thing to be talking about in Veterans Day, because it's like, is Rob really saying we should give the military less money? But you have to understand, a lot of that money is going to like all kinds of things. It's not our veterans, right? It's going to frivolous stuff for overseas base, things of that nature, defense contractors that are just wasting money and things like that. The real way to honor the troops and the veterans is to have them become a defense force in our country. Don't have them be stationed in places like Afghanistan or other terrible areas of the world. I think that we vastly overestimate that we need troops on the ground in these areas anymore. We shouldn't be getting involved in these conflicts, right? You can't force democracy on people. We should have a more mobile, strategically targeting military that's targeted for going and fighting terrorism and things like that, and then is robust enough to take on any challengers that we might need in a conventional war. But conventional wars are going to be few and far between going here on out. One, because we have such devastating things such as nuclear weapons and things of that nature, and other terrible weapons of mass destruction that may come about. So I think that if there were conventional wars, that escalation would be so great a fear that we're actually going to see less conventional wars. They're going to be more proxy wars like we see in Syria, where maybe Russia's backing Assad and we're backing the innocent rebels that are really just Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra, ISIS, and other groups, which I could go on all day about that. But that's not really the point I was trying to get to here. So as a politician or as a voter, I'm trying to vote and project policies that would bring the troops home, have the troops be robust, ready to, we could still be stationed in some countries, but we should get rid of the majority of overseas bases we have, and we would be able to save money, tons of money, and cut spending, and actually put more money into the actual troops as opposed to giving it to defense contractors and things of that nature. I don't know this, but I think that if I was a veteran or a troop, particularly if I'm still active duty, I would be more thankful to politicians and people that said, we respect you so much, what you do is an awesome thing, but we think you should be at home, you should be training here, you should be learning to be mobile, and if you have to travel overseas to complete some mission, you do it and then you come back, as opposed to you're going to be stationed in these places for years on end, right? I think that they would appreciate that as more supporting the veterans, as opposed to just giving them a big thumbs up one day a year and then forgetting about it, and meanwhile we stay in Afghanistan for 15 years or Iraq or who knows where else that we have soldiers across. So that is that's what I feel on Veterans Day. I also think that it's an absolute shame that two groups that forget the second group, but it's an absolute shame how we treat veterans, in the sense that they still have terrible health care when they get back. Everybody knows the statistics. I'm sure you've heard them today. More veterans end up dying home for things like suicide and mental health reasons and things like that than do in conflict overseas. And that's a terrible tragedy and disservice. We should be not just spending more money, right? Like, I think that that's a huge problem that we get into politically, where we're always just like, throw more money at the problem. But in reality, there's tons of things we could be doing. And it starts with all of us as individuals caring enough to worry about it and be concerned about it every day, as opposed to just one day a year, and start to demand change and get people in there that will actually have physical change. I think that that's one of the best things we could do. But hopefully if nothing else tonight, you only got 50 minutes left. Just think about how lucky we are that we had veterans that fought, that made our lives possible, and made this the greatest country in the world. And just if you know any veterans, let them know. Even if you didn't today, let them know that you're thankful. And don't just stop there, though. Do what you can to keep going further than that. So that's my spiel on Veterans Day. I went to Applebee's today. They were giving veterans free meals, so that was fantastic. Saw a lot there. It was really cool. And I watched Pittsburgh Penguins game last night where they honored a bunch of veterans. It was cool to see as well. So, yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. So, all right, now I'm going to try to, like, hit create highlight here. I think if it'll do what I... forget that. I have no idea what that is. I'll monkey around with that some other day. I'm so technologically illiterate. I have no idea what I'm doing half the time. So thanks for everyone that's here. Feel free, by the way, if you're here and you have anything you'd like me to talk about, feel free to put it on the chat and I'll see if I can. And yeah, anyone who's listening, like, you must be the most boring nerds in the world to be watching some fat, hairy guy ramble on about politics and life at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. But thank you anyways. And if you haven't, subscribe and like. And if you could recommend me to other people, that would be great as well. So, yeah, the shirt, right? Very nice, right, Zach? That's a Walmart special, baby. The wife got it for me. So, and the second thing I was going to talk about are these wildfires in California. What a crazy situation this is. Like 26 people dead already. Anytime there's a natural disaster like this, it's just a shame. And I hate how we react to it as a media and as a public. It's absolutely disgusting. So, yeah, the first thing to say about it is, you just hope everyone gets out, no one else gets hurt, and, possessions can be replaced and things of that nature, but you hope that it's able to, have your livelihood go on and be safe. So you really are thinking about those people. The videos are crazy. I mean, it looks like something out of a movie where people were driving away with like an inferno on both sides of them. So yeah, thoughts go out to them. It's a really crazy situation. So Trump came out and he basically was like, he gave it wasn't just one thing, but the big thing he said that's getting media attention is he said, basically, we're not going to give we'll stop giving money to California if they can't manage this properly, because his accusation is that the land management in California has been mismanaged, and that's what makes these wildfires so bad. And therefore, we should stop giving money to those government agencies because they're just making the situation worse. I probably said that more articulately than Trump did, though, because he just kind of blusters stuff out sometimes and it gets him in trouble. So, but yeah, that was what he said that was like a big controversy. So there's a couple things to say about this. The first is I think Trump's absolutely wrong to be discussing policy at a time when it's basically the tragedy still fresh in our mind. And actually, in this case, still ongoing, right? It just seems a poor time to do it. Again, even though I'm someone who supports Trump, I think when you support a politician or a group or an idea or anything like that, that you should be even more critical when something happens that you disagree with. So, yeah, I definitely disagree with that. I think Trump should – I don't like – Trump's done this in the past, like there'll be a terrorist attack and he, it's because of Obama's policies. Maybe that's true, but wait a week or something to say it, right? And yeah, I will admit to not being knowledgeable enough to know whether or not Trump's statement is true. Now, I know I've read articles from even before Trump made this statement from people in California and others saying that the management in California was the reason that these fires were getting so crazy in the first place. So Trump could be right. He could be correct in his statement, but I don't know that this is the time to be talking about it. So, yeah, I do admonish Trump for that. I don't think it was politically, it wasn't the smart thing to do, and I don't think morally it was a smart thing to do. And again, this is something, if you watched any of my other videos, particularly my last live stream, like this is something that you have to look at anytime these actions are being done. You have to ask yourself, like, morally, is it correct? But then there's also strategically, is it correct? So on a moral level, I just don't think it's good to be blaming people while this is still going on, even if it's true, right? And again, I'm not saying what Trump said is incorrect. I'm saying I'm ignorant of it. I don't know. I've read evidence that he is right, and I've also read evidence against it, but I haven't gotten detailed enough to know which side is correct or not. So even if Trump's correct about his criticism, I just think morally it was the wrong time to do it. And I think strategically it's bad, even if you want to disregard the moral argument, because you know that 90% of the mainstream media is out to get Trump and do anything anyways, as are basically the entire Democratic establishment and politicians, celebrities that are going to be affected because they live in California. So him coming off, him saying this allows them to switch the narrative, like, look how terrible and callous Trump is, blah, blah, blah. And then these people in the middle, like will be like, yeah, that is kind of a callous thing to say, which I agree with them. I think it is. So, yeah, both morally and strategically, I thought it was wrong of Trump to do that. So, however, that's not the end of the story, right? The irony is the people that are most vocal about how bad this is, most of them are the very first people to politicize any type of tragedy whatsoever. And I'll give you an example. This tragedy, for example, seems to be environmentally related right now. Who knows what the what the root causes of this? I'm sure there's tons of things. The climate in general or possible climate change maybe has something to do with it. Ineptitude of government agencies probably has something to do with it. It could be someone maliciously started a fire. Or, I don't know. There could be tons of reasons for it. There usually is in situations like this, right? So when people are trying to distill it down as to one factor as it's ongoing, it lets you know that they're looking at it through a political lens instead of kind of a humanitarian, like really worried about what's going on there lens. So so you might say, these people have a point, CNN or MSNBC or all these Democratic politicians or people you've seen on Facebook or wherever else, right? They might have a point, which they do have a point. Trump shouldn't have been said this, but almost all of them that are the most vocal about how bad it was for Trump saying this are the first people that anytime there's a hurricane, they'll say, see, because man-made climate change. Oh, we pulled out of the Paris Accord. That's why this is happening. Oh, it's because of the oil industries and the coal industries, right? They say that as the waves are still hitting. And it's hilarious that the very same people that say that are the ones that are out there like, how dare Trump say that today? Now, they'll say, well, the difference is Trump was threatening to cut off money. But if Trump really believes, right, that the money that's being sent to these Californian agencies are actually making things worse, how is that any different than when people on the left would say, oh, hurricanes, that's because we need these policies and we need to get away from fossil fuels and we need to be investing in renewables. So basically the difference is they're saying on the left, we need to take money from certain people, more taxes from people, and invest it where we want. And Trump, in his instance, is saying we need to take money away from these groups in California because they're making the situation worse and invest it in better areas. It's the exact same argument both sides are making. And so it's so funny to see the people that are the most vocal against Trump saying this about California to be the ones that that are then saying the exact same thing when it comes to like hurricanes or floods or blizzards, things of that nature, right? But it's beyond that, right? Look no further than anytime there's a shooting like last week. The very people that were screaming before, all the bodies could be identified with this California shooting and things of that nature that, oh, gun control, which I talked about in my last video. It goes against the normal narrative, right? Normally it's how bad are assault rifles, they're terrible things, right? But that was, a handgun was used for that attack, right? But those same people that right out of the gate, 20 minutes after it was reported, it's like, when will we learn? We need to get rid of all these guns. Those are the same people that are the most vocal today saying, how dare Trump say, that he was going to cut off funding because it was California governmental agencies that mismanaged that caused these fires. So I just find that hypocrisy hilarious again. And you are seeing some of it in both sides, to be fair, because a lot of the people that will correctly point out how stupid it is anytime there's a tragedy to politicize it, when these people are doing it, are defending Trump, saying, yeah, I think it was perfectly fine for Trump to say this today. But I think and again, my bias is I am libertarian Republican, and so my bias is going to be on the conservative side of things. So I fully admit that out front, but it does seem like that this hypocrisy is in greater amounts from the left. For example, on the fire issue specifically, Governor of California Brown comes out, right, and he's like, oh, this is going to be the new norm because of climate change. So now we're just going to see stuff like this because, we don't do anything politically about it, right? How is that any better than what Trump did, right? It's the same thing. He's politicizing the event. He's taking a tragedy and trying to use it to score political points and get his agenda passed. That's exactly what Trump was doing. So if one's bad, both are bad. And so it's just funny to see the people that are screaming the most about it. They're equally, if not more, guilty of doing the same thing anytime a tragedy on the other side happens. So that's my take on that. Did I have anything else to say on that? No. I think that was perfect. I think I covered it perfectly, right? Yeah. Nothing more to say. Third issue I wanted to talk about. I haven't seen a lot of this, talked about, but the creepy porn lawyer, as Tucker Carlson calls him, Michael Avenatti. For those of you who don't know, he's representing Stormy Daniels, who is the porn star that Trump supposedly slept with, and now there's allegations that Trump violated campaign finance reforms, pay her off, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not even really going to get into that today. That's something I'll be looking at more in depth and having probably just a video on it alone. But anyways, Avenatti now is coming out, and he put a little video out that showed what he says is he has a client, who is a immigrant, maybe gay. I think maybe he said a gay immigrant. And he was in a country club, and the video just shows Tucker Carlson basically saying, "Get the F out of here," and then someone in Tucker's crew kind of like grabs the guy, and there's a bunch of yelling going on. You can't really tell what's happening. Avenatti claims that this was Tucker and his family assaulting this guy who was just minding his own business sitting at a bar. He claims right before the video started, Tucker yelled, "Go back where you came from," implying that Tucker knew this guy. I'm guessing implying that because the guy didn't look white, that Tucker assumed he was an illegal immigrant or something and told him to get out of there. And that's Avenatti's story. Now, this story doesn't make sense on face value. You would have to assume, why would a public figure go out of his way to just some guy sitting on a bench doing nothing and just go up and say, "Hey, I'm just going to start harassing this guy for no reason"? Like, there had to be something that occurred to trigger this reaction, right? Unless Tucker and his family are just insane, which doesn't seem likely. So now I'll give you Tucker's version of what happened. Now, I'm not saying Tucker's version is 100% true, but at least it seems more plausible than this guy was sitting there doing nothing, minding his own business, and Tucker and his family decided to come up and harass the guy. It just doesn't make sense. So Tucker's version is he has a 19-year-old daughter. They're at this country club, and she gets up to use the restroom. And she comes back, and this guy stops her and's like, "Hey, are you sitting at the table with Tucker Carlson?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's my dad." And he calls her an effing C word, right? And she's basically in tears and comes back to the table, and Tucker says he's pretty fired up. So him and his son go up to the guy, and they're like, "Did you just say this?" And the guy gets belligerent with him and starts yelling and like basically calls her that name again. And Tucker's son throws red wine in the guy's face, and they, the back and forths are had, and then around this time is when the video would have started, and Tucker's basically yelling, "Get the F out of here," and there's kind of a crowd of people around, and that was kind of the end of it. And Tucker's statement goes on to say, like, basically, it took all he had not to physically assault the guy, which I 100% agree with Tucker. If a young girl in my family, if someone said that to her, I would probably, it would take a lot to not do something crazy. Yeah, red wine, right? Probably left a terrible stain. What a terrible thing. So, but yeah, so that's the story. Now, my takeaway of this, and this happened, by the way, October 10th, right? So my takeaway of this is, like, one, it shows that Tucker was already being harassed before this Antifa incident. Just a quick rundown in case you missed that. I kind of talked about that more in my last live stream, but what happened was this Antifa organization showed up outside of Tucker's house while Tucker was working. Tucker's wife and kids were in the home. She ended up having to hide in a pantry because they were trying to break the door in, and were chanting veiled threats saying that they shouldn't be allowed to sleep, and no borders, no walls, no USA at all, and they would feel as scared as illegals in the caravan felt, etc. So this shows that Tucker's been targeted before, as I think a lot of right-wing people are. You're starting to see it more and more. So, yeah, that was the first takeaway I had from it. The second is, like, it just shows how petty Avenatti is. The fact that he took this case, right, and is pushing it is no doubt because Tucker picks on him all the time, right, calls him a creepy porn lawyer, and made a fool of him when Avenatti came on the show, right? So this is clearly just Avenatti trying to get back at Tucker. And again, Avenatti has zero credibility whatsoever, and his story doesn't even make sense. Now, if you remember, during the whole Kavanaugh situation, Kavanaugh was the Supreme Court justice, or was nominated to be a Supreme Court justice. And for those, in case you didn't follow politics for like 2 or 3 weeks, he was the Democrat sent in this rape allegation, or sexual assault allegation, and a couple other women came out, and then Avenatti brings a woman out, and she claims that basically Kavanaugh was in charge of these rape gangs, that she showed up to basically 10 parties and watched girl after girl get raped by Tucker, gang raped by Tucker, or Tucker had nothing to do with that, by Kavanaugh and a bunch of other dudes, right? And so he was running these rape gang parties, Kavanaugh was, and then this woman actually herself was then raped in one of these rape gangs, and yet she still continued to come. The story made no sense whatsoever. And then she starts to get interviewed, and it's clear the more she talks about it, it's like, well, okay, maybe I didn't see this, maybe I didn't see that. And it turns out that it's all ridiculous, right? There was no credibility. Avenatti's problem there, and that woman's name was Sputnik, was that the lie was too great, right? Like, I'm not saying that Christine Blasey Ford, who was the first woman who came up with an allegation of Kavanaugh, I'm not saying she's lying. I certainly don't believe that her story was accurate, whether she intentionally lied or not. But I'm not saying she's intentionally lying. But that story, though, is the kind of story that at least is believable, right? Like, it was within the realm of possibility that something like that could happen. It was kind of like only three people in the room. It was no specific time given, no specific date. There wasn't actual ridiculous amount of physical harm that occurred. So it would be at least in the realm of possibility that this could have gone unreported for a couple decades and then resurfaced in this woman's mind, and now it was a big issue to her, right? Saying that gang rapes were occurring at these high school parties all the time. You watched all these girls get gang raped, right? Never said a word about it. Then yourself was gang raped, then continued to go back to the party. There had to have been hundreds of witnesses with all the men that were participating in these rapes and the women that were actually being assaulted. Plus, there were probably people at these parties that would have just been neither victims nor involved in the assaults. So hundreds of people, not one accusation ever made, not one other person came up. Like, it was clear that the story was garbage, right? Well, so Avenatti's now and his client are now under investigation. Possible criminal charges will be filed against them for making up a story like this and lying. So, fast forward to this situation then. Again, Avenatti's making up too great of a lie. He's a terrible liar, right? You don't lie and say, oh, no, the guy in that video that I'm representing now, he was just sitting at the bar doing nothing, watching sports on TV, and then all of a sudden Tucker Carlson comes up and's like, you need to get the F out of here, and his son's throwing wine on him and things of that nature. That doesn't even pass the smell test. That clearly isn't what happened. He would have been further ahead to at least admit some of the wrongdoing that this guy did. He got in an argument with Tucker and his family because he doesn't like his politics, but then Tucker and his family escalated it beyond what it should have needed. That would at least be a believable story. But Avenatti can't help himself, right? He's such a terrible liar and he's so petty, it's clear that he's not to be taken seriously. And so he comes out with this story. So it's an absolute joke. And then the worst part is he's making these grotesque exaggerations and lies. Again, I'm not saying that there couldn't be some point that Tucker and his family went too far, but the way Avenatti's spinning it is so ridiculous. That's clearly not what happened. He does this coming off the heels of Tucker being targeted by Antifa. The police are now looking at Antifa, the ones that tried to break into Tucker's house and things, as a possible hate crime. And to my what's the word I'm looking for? I was actually impressed with the fact that even most media people were like, yeah, this is too much. What Antifa did to Tucker was too much. So even though I think they're huge hypocrites because they've been defending Antifa, a lot of these people, over and over again, while those of us in the know have been like, look, these are not people to defend. It's going to get out of hand. Someone's going to get hurt. It's going to escalate. And they kept defending them over and over and things of that nature, right? I don't I still think they're hypocrites, but at least maybe they're coming at the opposite. Maybe they're coming around. They realize, geez, this group we've been defending, this was a bridge too far what they did to Tucker. So I thought maybe, okay, eventually they're going to be able to realize they made a mistake and try to distance themselves from this kind of extremism. So it's good that you've seen that in the media and with Democratic politicians and just normal everyday people you talk to that don't like Tucker or they call themselves Democrats. I was very pleased that a lot of them said that they thought what Antifa did was ridiculous in that situation. So for Avenatti then to come on the heels of that and then pile on to Tucker and his family is absurd. It's even worse. It just shows how much of an immoral, crappy person Avenatti is. And again, it would be different if he was telling the truth about what his client did, because then you could be like, well, this is a serious crime charge. And Avenatti comes out and addresses Tucker's statement of what happened in this incident, and he's like, oh, well, then why didn't Tucker tell people immediately what happened on his TV show and things like that? Clearly he's lying. Him and his son assaulted my client who did nothing. Well, that just goes to show, right? Like, and I think that that is a credit to Tucker, right? Like, he's not going out there, I think, really seeking victimhood points. I think if this incident happened to Jim Acosta or anyone at CNN or MSNBC, they would have immediately gone on air the next day and said, look what this Trump supporter did. This is because Trump's rhetoric. Now my family's being endangered. My daughter was called names, etc., etc. Tucker, to his credit, didn't come out and say, look what the Democratic rhetoric's doing. He just kept it to himself, right? He was just like, whatever. The country club supposedly did an internal investigation and told the gentleman that supposedly called Tucker's daughter these names that he was no longer welcome back. So they basically sided in favor of Tucker. So it's just another example. Avenatti, like, I'm sure it's not news to anyone watching, but Avenatti's a scumbag. He's broke. He's looking for publicity and money any way he can. And I hope he's in serious legal trouble for what he tried to do to Kavanaugh. That would be very amusing to me. I would think that he deserves to go down for that. A couple other things to talk about. I wanted to hit on immigration today. I talked to someone last night or the night before who I'm friends with, an older gentleman who's lived all over the world, and he's actually a legal immigrant to this country. And we got to talking about politics, and he happens to be someone who loves this country like I do. He thinks it's the greatest country, and really respects this country, and is happy to be a legal immigrant and a full-fledged citizen now of this country. And we just were talking about his process and some of his political beliefs. He is very similar to me in that if I had to sum up my political beliefs, as I said in my last video, it would be my the lens in which I try to view most political situations. Now, granted, it's not super simplistic. Every situation can be nuanced, but the area I start from is the virtue of personal responsibility. And so that enables you to look at a law and be like, well, you know, what laws should be passed regarding, for example, drug legalization and things of that nature? Well, because I'm looking at it through the virtue of personal responsibility, I'm saying, look, basically, we should have the freedom to put things in our body if we want until we hurt other people, right? So that influences why I think that, like, marijuana should be legal and things of that nature. This guy felt very similarly, and we're talking. I didn't know he was an immigrant. I just assumed he was. I knew he'd lived all over the world, but I thought he was a U.S. citizen and then moved around all over the world and then came back. That's what I thought. He asked me in the middle of we're talking about politics. He's like, well, he was talking about the caravan and things of that nature, and he's like, well, what do you think of legal immigration? And I was like, oh, I really don't get, like, a legal immigrant has every right to this country that I have, right? Once you're here legally, once our system says that you're a legal citizen of this country, that's it. It doesn't matter if it's because you were born here or because you busted your butt to get here legally, you know. And he's explaining me the process. It took him 8 years. You had to take you have to take a difficult test. They basically interview all the people in your life to make sure that you don't have, like, nefarious intents to the country or allegiance to another country. You have to renounce allegiance to any other country or leaders from other countries, things of that nature. And he was very proud to be able to say, like, yeah, I did all that because I love this country. And he was happy to know that, like, I was like, yeah, you're just as American as me. And ironically, like, you have to ask yourself, I haven't seen this question asked as expressively in the United States as I've seen in the UK. If anyone from the UK is watching here, the three of you. I'm talking like 5,000 people are watching, but whatever. You'll see this question. They have, like, shows called Question Time and things like that in the UK, and they'll ask, like, a question. I kind of like it, though it definitely can devolve into not a constructive debate, but regardless, I do like it. And so I've seen many of them where it'll be like, what is Britishness? You know, what is that as a value, right? You don't hear that, what is American? What does it mean to be an American, right? And with that, when they're asking that question, what is Britishness, it's because the implication is there has to be something that brings the country together, right? So in the UK, they're asking, what does it mean to be part of the United Kingdom? What does it mean to be British? What are the values of the British, right? Well, we need to ask that question in the United States as well, right? Because, like, again, you hear this mantra of diversity is our strength. Diversity is our strength, right? Again, I've said it over and over in all my videos. I don't care about your skin color, your sexual preference, your religion, your gender, your ability, your height, your weight, your facial hair. None of it makes a difference, right? Like your thoughts, your opinions, who you are as an individual. That's what people should be concerned with. That's what I'm concerned with, right? And so because we have people, you know, most countries were set up where you basically had like an overwhelming population of people that were all from the same background. And so that's what made the country, right? You know, different tribes. One tribe basically controls this whole country, and then maybe there's a spattering of other people in there. Well, we don't have that, right, in this country, and that was never the idea, right? And that's where the white nationalists get it wrong, right? They're like, well, we need a country for white people. You know what? Maybe that's true. I happen to disagree, but not this country. You know, go somewhere else. Set your country up elsewhere. That's not what this country's about. This is a country for Americans. That could be any race, gender, etc., right? But we still need something to bring us all together. So I think that the idea, like some universal ideas that make us American, are the idea of personal responsibility, the idea of, which is an extension of individuality, right? British common law and the foundation of the United States. To me, the idea was you were responsible for, you had this entrepreneurial like spirit of the West and things of that nature, where it was like, you bust your butt, you can make it here, you know, no matter what. We don't care who your family was, we don't care what your religion was, you come here, you work hard, you could make it. Right now, cynical people will say like, yeah, but the country's no longer like that. In an extent, not, but I think that it's more like that than we let on. I'm not saying you'll be Bill Gates or you'll become a super wealthy person, but you could succeed here far better and have a far better quality of life than you could in many other countries. One person I listen to sometimes, I disagree with some of the stuff they say, but is Dinesh D'Souza, who's kind of this Republican person. He makes all these movies and things like that. He comes from India, and he was talking about like, look, there was a certain caste system of India because based on who his family was and things of that nature and corruption of local politicians and things, you could have never broken a barrier to get beyond basically just living in poverty. The middle class is so important in this country, like that, and that's the idea of individuality, the focus on the individual rather than on the collective, personal liberty, things of that nature, and hard work. I think those are the values that make us American. That's what diversity is, right? You do what you want as home. We're all individuals, but we all relish that individuality and the focus on the individual and the idea of hard work and the idea of the American spirit being that we all collectively are together based on those ideals, right? The religion doesn't matter. The race doesn't matter, you know. The sport team you cheer for doesn't matter. That, to me, is what it means to be American. And we need to have something that brings us together, right? Or what are we? Then all of a sudden you start to split up. And this was something the Founding Fathers were worried about with the states, right? It used to be you didn't consider yourself an American. You were a Pennsylvanian or a Virginian, right? You were your statehood first, and we realized that we needed to be united as a country, and it was particularly important back then for reasons militaristically, economically, things of that nature. To compete with other countries in the world, we had to be able to come together as a country. Now, having a brief aside, I am a big supporter of federalism and state rights. I do think that the Founding Fathers were right to understand that we weren't just one big country. We were a collection of states that was one big country, right? And that states' rights are very important. But I digress. So anyways, this person I'm talking to that's a legal immigrant, they relish the exact same values that I'm talking about, right? So why wouldn't, like, what does it matter if they were born here or not? I don't care at all. And he was happy to hear that was my take on it. And I did a video on this. You can check it out if you want. It was probably a couple months ago. Some of the best people I would consider the best Americans I've ever met are legal immigrants, right? There are people that you see working like 18 hours a day. They always have a smile on their face. They're happy to be here. They know more about the history of the country than probably me and most people that were born here and things of that. Like, that's a true American. I don't care that they have a thick accent or that their skin color doesn't look like mine or, you know, they have some different religion than me. None of that matters, right? They're American. That's what brings us together, right? That's like when we say diversity is our strength, it is, but you have to have something that brings you together, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of my spiel on immigration. And this guy, you know, this guy I was talking to, a really smart guy, really interesting guy. I hope maybe someday to have him on the channel. But yeah, he was talking about how, you know, as an immigrant, he is very upset about illegal immigration, as I expected, and I've heard other tales of, because, you know, if you did everything the right way at great expense to you at many years, and a lot of hard work going into it, and then you see people come and they're competing with your job because they just decided to walk across a river or across a border, like, that's offensive, that's upsetting. And the other thing is, a lot of these people don't share those ideals, right? That you see people waving the flag of the country they're coming from, or they're burning the American flag, or they're cursing the American political system, of things of that nature. They're here for economic reasons, right? Like they want the welfare programs that we have, or entitlement programs that we have, and that's why they're coming here. You see the same thing, by the way, in Europe, where so-called refugees, you know, a refugee, think about the idea. If you're a refugee, that means you're fleeing some kind of intense violence, and you're no longer safe at your own country. So the idea is, and basically what the international law is, that the first kind of country you get to that is a signee onto the UN, I believe, that this conflict isn't happening, is supposed to accept you, which would make sense, right? Like, if you're fleeing a burning house, you just want anywhere to take you in that's not on fire, right? You're not going to say, well, actually, I don't like your house. Do you have any neighbors with, like, you know, a better cable package, a more comfortable couch? Like, no, beggars can't be choosers, which sounds very callous, talking about refugees. I don't mean it that way. I don't mean that they're beggars. I just mean that idiom, you know, the phrase. But, you know, you would be grateful and say, yes, okay, I'm out of this place. If you're saying, no, now I want to move further for economic reasons, well, then you're no longer a refugee. You're an economic migrant, right? So that's the spiel. That's what we're seeing with, like, the caravan and things like that. These aren't refugees, or they would be staying in Mexico or the other places where they're at. Instead, they're saying, no, we want to get to the United States because we have a better economic chance there. Now, by the way, I don't begrudge the individual that's trying to do that. That's fine, right? Like, if I say this all the time, and people think I'm a hypocrite for saying this, but if my neighbor was an illegal immigrant and they're basically like they're not committing crazy crimes or anything like that, and they're going to work every day, I wouldn't rat them out, right? But I still would be for us enforcing laws and doing our best to curb illegal immigration and things of that nature. By the same token, if I think we should have speeding laws, but if I know my neighbor speeds all the time, I'm not going to call the cops and say, oh, my neighbor's a speeder. So, you know, that's what I mean by that. So, yeah, legal immigrants, they're not really thrilled about illegal immigration. And where that leads is, like, it's kind of, and you'll hear me harp on this a lot, maybe you could figure out why, because I just told you, like, personal responsibility will be when I run for office. That's basically the lens and the virtue that I follow the most. And so the idea of socialism and identitarian politics and cultural Marxism is anathema to me. It's like the exact opposite. That's why I'm so worried about it. Again, I'm just trying to remind myself to always assume the best of intentions for people I'm discussing this stuff with. So I'm not saying they're crappy people if you believe in socialism or anything like that. But I think that you're horribly wrong, because now we're no longer focusing on the individual. We're focusing on the collective, and that leads to all sorts of problems. But I can get into at a later date with more videos on that. But so yeah, what happens is you then see these weird situations where they'll take polls, which, again, I'm always talking about polls, and then I'm always like, yeah, I don't trust polls, because I'm a hypocrite as well, I guess. But no, you could get kind of a general idea from polls, but you should take the aggregate. You shouldn't look at a specific poll, and a lot of times I still think they're kind of off. But anyways, the media will talk about these polls like, oh my goodness, Trump's approval amongst Hispanic people is like 28-30%. We can't believe it's that high because he's such a racist, right? And the truth is, like, the Hispanic community, particularly the ones that are legal immigrants, probably aren't thrilled about illegal immigration. And the idea that they should be just because they happen to have the same ethnicity does seem a little racist, doesn't it? Right? It's because you run into all kinds of crazy problems like that when you think of people based on their race first. Like, I'm sure if you talk to a legal Hispanic immigrant, right, they would feel more in common with the average American or the average Irish immigrant or the average Asian immigrant, whatever, right, than they would for an illegal immigrant, because they would say, yeah, I busted my butt because I love this country and I did things the right way and it was at great expense to me, and just like this guy from Ireland, just like this guy from China, just like this guy from Nicaragua, whatever, right? Like, yeah, we all went through this process. We share this kind of camaraderie and love for this country, right? Just because I look like this guy that came over illegally doesn't mean that I'm automatically ideologically aligned with that person. And, you know, like, why do we do that? Like, and when I say we, like, as a country, we kind of do this, but particularly the left and the Democrats do this a lot. Like, they assume that every race other than white, right, can be lumped together and thinks monolithically. Like, it's absolutely absurd. You saw it with the Kanye West thing, right? Like, you can't be a black person and leave their reservation. You can't do it. They'll come after you harder than they would, like, just an everyday white person or something like that. It's absolutely ridiculous. You would never assume that, like, if I stood up and was like, well, I'm a white community leader, I speak for white people. In fact, people do that. That's like the white I said doo-doo twice in, like, 2 minutes. That's awesome, right? But you see these white nationalists, like Richard Spencer's will try, oh, we're speaking for white people, and, like, almost every white person, and when I say almost every, I mean, like, well over 90% are like, what? No, shut up. What are you talking about? But they get away with this in other communities. Oh, Hispanics, the number one issue for Hispanics is X, and Hispanics feel this way about Trump, or the black community. Oh, there's my fantasy football score going on. The black community feels X about Trump and things like that. It's like, no. All people of any race are individuals, right? Stop trying to lump them together as this group. So, yeah, you end up and the last thing I'll say about immigration, because I'm kind of rambling about it, is there's always an attempt to conflate a dislike of illegal immigration with a dislike of immigration in general, and that's just patently false. I haven't seen Trump do that, and I also don't feel that way myself, right? Again, I can't make it more clear. I have the utmost respect for legal immigrants of this country. They deserve to be here. The government deserves to work for them, just like me, who is not an immigrant but is also a citizen of this country. Doesn't matter how you became a citizen. If you are, this government should work for you, period. Even if I disagree with you ideologically, right? Which I'll get into in a second. But, yeah, the government should work for you. And that doesn't mean because you're against illegal immigration that you're against this legal immigration. I hate the fact that it keeps getting conflated, and then the coup de grace is then you throw and racism on top of it, which none of that makes sense. So, real quick, I was talking just there briefly. I mentioned, let me get a drink of water. I told myself I'd remind myself to drink this time. Oh, in my last live stream, I had my wife watch a little of it. I think she really hates me, so it's easy for her to criticize me. Nah, she's great. But she told me, I say like too much, which is terrible for someone with a speech communication degree. I should know better. But the worst thing I did was, I've never sat and just talked to a group of people. Like, no one, I'm better in a dialogue, which is why I hope any of you four watching, or anyone who watches in the future, if you would like to do a video with me, I think that would be fantastic, because I'm better in a dialogue. I think most people are. So when I'm doing like a monologue like this, I keep saying, right? So I'll be like, you know, you could be concerned about the caravan, but still not dislike legal immigrants, right? Am I right? Yeah, and I said it like every other word, so hopefully I've been better tonight. I don't know. It's something I'm working on. But, yeah, the idea of our government should work for even the people we disagree with. I think when I run for office, that's one of the things I want to do. I'll be running as a Republican, but I want to also go to the Democratic office and talk to the Democrats, because, one, they might have ideas that they could convince me, or at least further help me buttress my ideas that I would have for policies and things of that nature. And second, we do need to be having a dialogue with everyone, even if we have different opinions. I don't recall ever politicians going to the other side and being like, yeah, can I have a discussion? If you got elected, what would your policies be? You know, is there kind of a compromise we'd have? Or, yeah, I don't think we should compromise on this because I think I'm right. But nonetheless, you should let people, both in real life and if you're running as a politician, you should let people know, hey, I'm still looking out for you. I'm still concerned about your input. I still think the government should work for you, even though I disagree with you, and I value your input into that. So, yeah, I think we get too much of like, oh, the government needs to be focused on, you know, people I identify with, or people that voted for me or vote the way I ideologically do, and screw the other side. Like, I don't think that's the right way to go about it. And I don't really see any politicians that are really trying to make headway. That's why, I mean, both sides do it. I think the Democrats, again, do it worse, but I might be biased. But that's why you have Hillary being like, 50% of Trump's people were deplorable, or you can't be civil with these people. And, you know, there's these constant homages to, oh, people that voted for Trump are racist, they're uneducated. Like, all of these comments, I won't, like, just because I disagree with it, like maybe you're, like, for example, some of my friends are Bernie supporters, Democratic Socialists. I would still want them to know, hey, if I get elected, I'm still, working for you as well, just because we disagree. Now, I might not advocate policies you like, but I still value your input. And if I disagree with you, I'll let you know. But I still want you to know that I'm listening, right? I don't understand why, why that doesn't happen more often. Also, a couple other things that I'd be doing is when I run, and I'll get into more videos of what my specific platform will be. I will be running as a Republican, and I will be running basically in my district. I would assume a Republican's going to win like almost every time. So basically the primary is the election. But even aside from that, like, I think that there needs to be more public, if not debates, like town hall type settings with people that are running for office, so that people could have more input as to what the platforms are of the people. I also think that I would want to do something like, I don't think politicians use social media as effectively as they could. Obama was kind of the first president that kind of tried, which I do kind of give him credit for. But, like, do you have any clue on an average week what your politicians are doing? Like, you probably don't. I don't understand why they don't use the opportunity more successfully to be like, hey, I'm going to do an hour YouTube video a week or whatever, some kind of platform where I'll take emails from people and respond to them and let everyone know what I was up to this week and try to reach out to people so they at least have some clue. And then maybe that's a bad thing, right? Because maybe you do that and people realize, man, this guy hasn't done crap for 2 years that I like. But that's fine. If that would be the case and you lose, so be it. At least the people who have more of an idea of what's going on and things of that nature. Just reading the chat here. You could take... Anyways, yeah, and then a couple other things that I would like to do is, like I said, reach out to the other side, the Democrats and things of that nature. I also advocate term limits. I'm trying to figure out what the term limit should be. I think it should probably be 3 terms in the House and 2 terms in the Senate. So that would be a term in the House is 2 years, so you could have a total of 6 years in the House, and a term in the Senate 6 years. 1 term is 6 years, so you could have up to 2 of those, which means you could have 12 in the Senate. That would be 18 years. And then, if you wanted to run for president, that could be a possible 8 on top of those. So, but forget that. We'll just say the 18 years. That seems more than enough, right? Keep in mind, the original idea was that being a politician was basically service to your country. It was similar to the military, though I wouldn't deign to say that it's as reputable or as dangerous or courageous or anything like that. But think of how it was when the Founding Fathers started. Almost all of them were landowners that owned farms and things of that nature. You didn't want to be bothered to have to travel to Philadelphia or later to D.C. or whatever but you felt that it was your civic duty. So you were like, okay, I'll go serve for a couple years and try to do what's best for this country. And then finally you'd probably lose money during that time. Hopefully you had family that could help manage your land while you were gone. And then, you went, you served, you came back, and then it was like, whew, thank goodness that's done. I can get back, to working for my family, working to enrich myself and my community and things of that nature. Now it's a career, right? So when I say 18 years, like, that seems like a huge amount of years. And you're right, it is a huge amount of years. Now consider that we have people that are career politicians that have been there 30, 40 years. Like, how long's Pelosi been there? Think of what happens also. I think that you get in with good intentions, and it's actually, like, in all seriousness, it's a fear I have that I think that I'm a moral person. I think that I care about the people that would be my constituents and things of that nature. But you get in there, and I think the first thing you'll probably realize is you basically can't do squat by yourself, right? And you basically have to play the game to be able to get even small head roads. So you end up making some small sacrifice. You're like, okay, well, I gotta play ball somewhat in order to get any of my ideas. And so then the longer you're there, the more you've sacrificed some of your ideas to play ball. And after you're there, as long as someone like Pelosi and stuff, the only thing you're concerned with is just getting reelected and pushing your, the establishment platform. That's it. You basically sacrificed any good intentions you had. I say the same thing about Obama. There are some people that are like, oh, Obama was this terrible person. I think he was horrible. Like, I certainly think he was incorrect, like, to put it nicely. But I think that he probably had decent intentions when he got in. And then he realized, like, okay, well, I gotta play ball with this and this. And the next thing you know, he's bailing out banks and overthrowing foreign governments and things of that nature. Basically everything he promised to be against. Hope and change, right? Yeah, what a joke. So, so that's a reason I think the term limit should be there. And yeah, I think there should also be some laws about what kind of lobbying. You shouldn't be allowed to like get into lobbying and things of that nature after you've served for so many years, because there's kind of this revolving door where you end up working for a politician, and then you're a lobbyist, and then you're back to working for a politician. And so it's just more incentive, you know, to do even more with what these lobbying groups do. People talk about, hear this all the time, where they'll talk about, oh, I'm drawing a blank right now. What's the name of the law, but that allows big money in politics? Man, I feel stupid. I'm drawing a blank, but I guess it is near midnight. But anyways, they talk about that law, and they're like, oh, well, that's why we have money in politics. That's why everything goes wrong. But even if you would repeal that law, you still have this revolving door. It's not like a lobbyist has to give you X amount of dollars, and that's the only way they could do things. They could offer you a job when you're out of office and things of that nature. So we need to be focused on things like that as well. So that's just a couple ideas. And also, I think the last thing I'll say, exactly, campaign finance. The last thing I'll say on this is, I think the Republic. See, I would look at it like this: as a in life, right? Who do you look out for? Like, what is the kind of hierarchy that you're looking out for? I mean, for me, it's like my family, myself, followed by, or my immediate family itself, followed by my extended family, followed by my friends and my community. And then, then I guess it would go to, like, state, country, not so much state, but you get what I'm saying. And then political party would be way down the line, right? Like, so I'm kind of a Republican, so that would be, like, at the bottom after all of that stuff, right? But as a politician, your criteria is a little different. That doesn't mean if I became a politician, that would change who I was individually. But as a politician, you're also it's a job, right? So, like, for example, my job that I have now, my number one concern at my job is still to do my job correctly and everything go well. Even though in real life, my family's still the most important thing. When I'm at work, I'm not going to call my wife and talk to her when I'm at work, because work comes first in that instance, things of that nature. So as a politician, I think the first thing you look at is you're looking at for your country first, right, period. And then your political party is below that. So I would still want to help the Republican Party, but I'm concerned about the country first. That's why I would say, you know, I'm willing to vote for someone who's not a Republican, for example, because I'm not just concerned about the party. I'm concerned about the country first. So anyways, looking at it through the lens of the party, though, like, I would make that clear to the Republicans, like, look, I am looking out for country first. But you still want the Republicans to do well if you're going to run as a Republican. And I think they do a very terrible job in reaching demographics that they're doing poor at. So, for example, minority communities, young people, people that tend to live more in the cities, things of that nature, they don't do a very good job of reaching out to them. And the problem is, it's because the Democrats rely on their type of argumentation is kind of emotionally driven, and has this tinge of, like, morality to it, right? So you can see this in any issue. So take gun control, right? Like, anytime there's a shooting, you'll hear things like this. They'll say, like, oh, well, if you're for the Second Amendment or gun rights, then clearly you don't care about children dying. Well, no, it has nothing to do with that. But then it doesn't matter what facts. If you're like, you know, maybe you'll say this fact. Well, wait a minute. The last time we had kind of like a big assault rifle ban, what ended up happening were that the amount of mass shootings actually increased. So what you're suggesting is ineffectual. It's taking away rights, blah, blah, blah. But that logical, factual way of doing things, it's difficult to overcome the emotional morality argument, right? Because no matter what you say factually, it's the emotion of it that is going to outweigh that, right? And so you see that with things like the caravan or illegal immigration, right? Like, if you're human and you see pictures of these caravans and things, like, it does. It's emotional. You feel bad for these people, right? And by the way, that's all. It's kind of a trick of the mind. They know what they're doing. They know how to advertise, so they know how to take the pictures in just the right way. They know just who to focus on from these caravans. They don't focus on the fact that, like, 90% of them are working age males, right? They always take the most sympathetic angle that they could take on it. And so if you're human, you're like, oh my God, yeah, that's, like, you do feel for those people, but you have to take a step back and be like, well, wait a minute, there's a lot, like, what is logically makes sense? What can we do? And things of that nature. And the logic seems to be secondary to the emotion of it. And so the Republicans need to do a better job of explaining that, and then also using the emotion to their side, right? So, one sec. I hate getting pigeonholed, for example, looking at race. That would be where I would start with it. You see that the left and the Democrats want to focus on race exclusively and look at racial groups as their kind of this collective idea. And I've talked about cultural Marxism. They want to set up different conflicts between these different groups, oppressors versus oppressed in every area. Race happens to be one of them. So right now, it's white people are the oppressors. These other groups would be the oppressed, right? And they try to set this up. So they would say then that you have to advocate the policies they advocate because it's for the oppressed groups. And if you're against that, then clearly you hate the oppressed groups. I disagree with that, right? So let's take inner city policies. We could say things like a lot of welfare that goes in those policies, affirmative action, things of that nature. They could say, well, if you don't support that, then clearly you don't care about the people that those programs are being geared towards. But I say the opposite. I say, no, I think those programs are actually harming the people that are geared towards. And here's why. They want to focus on Jim Crow laws and slavery and things of that, which, by the way, I don't belittle. They're absolute horrible stains on our country, and we should never forget them. Like, I agree with that. But, like, how can you explain by a lot of metrics these same communities that they're talking about are doing worse today than they were doing during the Civil Rights Movement? Like, slavery would have had more of an effect the closer you got to slavery. It's not like slavery really affected people as soon as it ended, and then less and less and less and less, and then 100 years later, now more all of a sudden. Like, no, that just doesn't make sense. So I think that what ended up happening was the war on poverty actually made the situation worse. I think I talked about this in my last video, but there was a report that came out during the Civil Rights era. It was called the Moynihan Report, and it was done by a Democrat, which said that it was an epidemic that we really needed to focus on, that a lot of in the black community, it was like 25% of children were being born out of wedlock. That number is now up to like 75%, and it's really high. It's well over 50-60% for white people, etc. Now, I'm not focusing on, don't be mistaken, I'm not saying that like there's like this is based on like race or something, how someone was born. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying there's cultural influences going into this. And the reason I think it's gotten worse in all communities, particularly in the black communities, because we incentivized single motherhood through the war on poverty. So we had all these policies where basically people were going door to door saying like, oh, you know, if there's not a man in the house, we'll give you money. The government will give you money. Oh, okay. And so this was incentivized. Now, you have an entire community of people, one, that grow up in really terrible, difficult situations where there's a lot of crime and poverty and things of that nature. But secondly, they've been told for years, like, this country treated you like crap. It owes you something. You're a victim. That means something. You don't have to work hard. Everyone owes you, right? Like, that's told generation after generation. And then it's like, here's a bunch of free stuff. Here's a bunch of programs that we think will help you. You need to be treated differently because of your skin color, right? Like, this has been said for years and years. If I grew up in that community, I will guarantee you I wouldn't have been strong enough to get out. I would have fell into gangs. I would have thought that the world owed me something. I wouldn't have tried to worry about like bettering myself or getting a job. And so I don't judge any of those people, right? Like, I think most of them are doing far better than I would. I know my, conviction. I know how impressionable I am and things of that nature. So I don't begrudge any of that. In fact, I think, every year when I think of it during Martin Luther King Day, like one of the things I like to think about is the black people in the black community that I think are heroes. And there are two that I think of regularly. One is the people that were slaves that said afterwards, I just want a chance to prove that I could work and be as good as people of other ethnicities. And they weren't saying, like, I want special treatment, things like that, even though they were certainly entitled to it, right? When they were actually directly affected by slavery. So the idea of reparations at that point should have happened, right? I do agree with that. But despite that, they said, we just want the chance to prove we could work as hard as you and be as hard as you. That's an inspiration to me. That is unbelievable strength of character. And I think of that every year in Martin Luther King. And I also think about the people that grew up in these inner city communities where education is so terrible, the system's terrible, where the idea of even being intellectual or reading and things of that nature is frowned upon culturally, and where you're constantly told you're a victim and things of that nature, and that everyone owes you some. Yet there are people that come out of those communities that just through the strength of their character and their ability to work hard, that are incredible successes. And those are people that are stronger and better Americans than I'll ever be. So, like, that's the type of people I think about. So anyways, it's all a long-winded way of saying, like, it's not that I dislike those communities, which is why I want to see those programs ended. It's that I, too, want those programs or those communities to thrive. I don't care about race. I don't care at all. I don't care what happened 30, 40 years ago or even well before then, right? The truth is, if you're looking at groups, right, any groups, whether it be a racial group, so you could say like black, white, Irish, wherever, you take any ethnicity, right, have been oppressors and oppressed in their past, right? Every individual, it's the same. We've all been good and bad people. Now, granted, there's varying scales of that, but the truth is, that's just the way it is. The truth is, all of us in life have had some kind of unfair situation or hardship apply to us, right? Every one of us, some more than others, right? Maybe you were born with a really terrible illness. Maybe a loved one died way too soon for you. Maybe you've just had a string of bad luck and things like that. Maybe you were prescribed pain pills when you were 14, and because of that, now you're addicted and things of that nature. It doesn't matter. You'll never get, like, you just have to act in life like, I need to take responsibility for myself. Lamenting the terrible situation you're in will never cause you to succeed or improve in life. So you just need to act as if, I get it, like, I could sit here and complain about it, but it won't do any good. We should govern the same way, right? We can't govern and say we need to correct these mistakes of the past, what we did to certain groups or things. We can't do that. We as a government should just be like, we no longer care about race or sex or sexual, like, if you're gay or not or any of that. Like, we shouldn't make any laws based on any of that. It should be, you're all equally capable. That's how we're going to govern. There will not be affirmative action. There will not be special treatment for people based on these immutable characteristics. That's how I feel. And so what I'm talking about is how this would help the Republican Party, why I think that I would be a good candidate, or ideas like mine would be good for the party, because I think we need to be saying like that, look, we are reaching out to these communities, and the way we're reaching out is that we think that logically the plans that have been initiated have only made things worse. And then I was talking about how the logic argument always seems to be trumped by the left making these emotional arguments. Well, I think the counter to that emotional argument, which is, oh, well, then you're a racist if you want to like change these programs. The counter to that is like, no, I think that the way you're acting is kind of more racial, right? Or in a racist manner, because it's like the bigotry of low expectations, right? Oh, these people aren't as capable as white people, or women aren't as capable as men, or gays aren't as capable as straights, or etc. However they want to use their cultural Marxism and identitarian politics to break us apart, right? They always say that one group needs help because they're not as good as the other group. I disagree. I think that if we encouraged policies that treated everyone legally as the exact same, and we stopped making kind of having like this cultural idea of saying that some people are victims and things like that, then people in all of those quote oppressed groups would actually show us that they're every bit as capable as people in the other groups. And I think that there are some people, and again, I always assume the best of intentions when I'm directly talking with someone that may disagree with me, but I definitely think there are people that have this kind of almost racist idea that are afraid, right? LBJ supposedly said, I'll have these N-words voting Democrat for the next 100 years. Like, I don't know if that's true or not, but he supposedly said that. Like, I think there was fear, like, oh my God, as these educated, rich white people, we're afraid that maybe these black people are going to end up being just every bit as capable and smart and as hardworking as us. So instead, let's treat them like children so they never rise up and succeed like that. That's how I look at it. But nonetheless, you might disagree with me, right? You might say like, no, these policies are good for the black community. Here's why. That's great. But I'm not a racist for thinking the way I am, right? Like, I care about those groups. I care about all groups. In fact, I care about the groups even more in the sense that I don't care that they're a group. I care about them as people, right? The group doesn't matter to me. So I don't think that we should have policies that are focused on particular groups like that. So yeah, that's my spiel on that. A couple more things to get to, unless anyone has something they'd want me to talk about. Oh yeah, transgenders. Yeah. That is different. I think the transgender thing, right? Like that becomes an issue because let me put it this way. I remember saying years and years ago, and this is coming from like a dumb redneck that was just going to like basically a kind of a small state school, Clarion University I went to. I remember when I first started. Can you see me now?
Hey, Rob.
Can anyone hear me now? If someone could type if Okay, I'm back. So anyways, about the debate community, one of the things that I liked about the debate community was that I got to meet a bunch of people because it's super left-wing, so I got to meet a bunch of people that were different than me. But as cool as the debates and like the idea of that was, I liked the car rides a lot too, because you would travel in these vans with you would travel in these vans and you'd have these like 9-hour conversations about politics and stuff. So anyways, I remember saying as like an 18-year-old, like, yeah, I could care less about gay marriage, things of that nature. Like, who cares? If they want to get married, let them. Like, I still feel that way, right? I was like, but what will happen is in the future we're going to have discussions about like, what do you do about like showers in high schools and things of that nature, right? Because presumably the idea why you don't have boys and girls showering together is because of like puberty and sexual tension and things of that nature. So just on the gay lesbian fact, like, are you comfortable with having someone who's sexually attracted to women showering with naked women? Now, I think ultimately we have to allow that to occur, right? Don't get me wrong. I just said it was an area for discussion, right? And that was well before the transgender debate started. So yeah, the transgender debate, it's definitely, it's different than just the homosexuality debate, right? But, I do think that I will say that I think the right was kind of silly in North Carolina or wherever they first started to push the bathroom bills, and that they started to make a big stink. It was like what are you going to do? Like have someone standing at the bathroom checking genitals before they go in, right? Like there are guys, on the extreme levels, there are biological women who look so much like men that if they were going into the men's room, that's fine, as long as they're not making a scene or doing anything untoward or something like that. And so to force a biological female who looks exactly like this big muscular man to then go into the women's room seems like it's like whatever, just leave well enough alone until there's a problem, right? Once there's a problem, then fine, get authorities involved or whatever. But you see what I'm saying? So I thought the Republicans that started pushing that, it was just nonsensical. But now that, again, as always, the reaction by the left has been even crazier, right? And so they're like, oh, there are no differences, right? And they're putting things in like you see people that like are clearly men that throw a dress on that's like, yeah, I want to just hang out in the women's room and things of that nature. Like, it's crazy. Now, I know a lot of people that are advocates for the transgender community will say, yeah, it's rare for that to happen. But nonetheless, like, we have those separated for a reason. And you have all kinds of individual cases that come up. And it's like, you could tell, it's not just like, I think that like even most reasonable transgender people would say like, dude, I'm just trying to go to the bathroom. I really don't care, right? I'm not trying to make a stink of it. But the ones that are trying to make a stink, right, are people that are using this as a political wedge issue, right? And so like I remember reading this story of this. It was a biological boy who was transitioning to a girl, but clearly looked like a boy. And it was like a high school, so everyone knew who he was. He had been a boy for years. And so he wanted to go to the girls' locker room, and the girls were not comfortable with it. And the reason he didn't want to be in the boys' locker room was because he was uncomfortable, and he had all these people come to his defense like, yes, because men could be aggressive sexually or be rude and things of that nature. So he wasn't comfortable being in the men's room with them. But the irony is, it's like, well, everything you just said would be also a reason why these girls would be uncomfortable with a boy in their locker, right? If you're right that men are more aggressive sexually and things of that nature, then don't those girls have a right to say, yeah, and we don't want a boy in here with us? Like, so that argument didn't make any sense. And so they try to be reasonable and say, hey, you could use the faculty showers and the faculty restroom. And then this boy was like, no, that's not good enough. I want to use exactly what I want. And that's the problem, right? That's where we start to see the problem. I talk about Jordan Peterson a lot. I really like him. He became famous because he fought this bill again, I'm tired. I'm sorry. I can't remember the name of it. But there was a bill in Canada where he's from that basically said you have to use gender pronouns. And there's a huge list of them. I'm sure most of you watching know this, but right, it's he and she's no longer enough. Now you have z, zer, zay, wormkin. Like there's literally the list of them. It's comical. It's ever growing, right? And this law is basically like you could be held financially punished, fired from your job and such like that, under like basically a hate crime law if you refuse to call someone the pronoun that they want. And then Peterson's point was not only that, but then what happens if you don't pay the fine? Well, then you go to jail. So you can literally be incarcerated for not using the pronoun that someone wants. And it leads to all kinds of hilarious situations. And Peterson argues, and I have no reason to think this is untrue, that he's actually got far more emails from transgender people that agree with him or at least are defending him than transgender people that are upset with him. He argues that the majority of people that are raising a stink about this aren't even transgender at all. They're just people using the transgender people as their wedge issue, so they're basically using them just to score political points. And I think that's the same thing you're seeing in this country with the bathroom bill. I don't know that a lot of transgender people like are that concerned with it. I think, I happen to be someone who thinks that it's a mental illness. And if you're transgender and you're watching this, like that might very much upset you. But having said that, with that mental illness, I don't treat you any differently whatsoever. Like I don't care. I don't treat someone with ADD or with Asperger's or anything like that differently, so I wouldn't treat you differently, right? I just happen to think it's an illness. You might disagree. Who knows? Maybe someday you'll be proven right. I don't think so, but I'm not going to treat you any differently, right? But I assume that like just because you suffer from that affliction, or if you don't put it that way, you just are how you are, right? That doesn't mean that somehow makes you like an automatic jerk that's going to demand to be able to use whatever restroom they want or things like that. We have to have clear, like there have to be legally and culturally, we need to have a clear delineation between genders. It's just that simple. Otherwise, we get crazy stuff like men throwing on dresses and then boxing women, or men winning all these bicycling champions. Men are so great, we won the Woman of the Year with Caitlyn Jenner, right? Like, it's such a joke. And this is an area where you're seeing, like, the intersectionality of cultural Marxism and identitarian politics. Like, it's showing that it doesn't jive, right? Because you've had women, feminists for years, that are saying, like, basically women are special, women are great, men have treated them like crap, right? And now the transgenders come along and they're like, yeah, well, we're women too. Right now, I was born a man, but I identify as a woman. So I get all the victimhood of a woman. And a lot of these old school feminists are like, no, womanhood's more than just the body parts, right? It's a lived experience. And now there's this huge clash, right? There are actual feminists being deplatformed because they're not progressive enough, because they're against transgenderism. It's utterly insane. And that's eventually what happens with all this like cultural Marxism. People start to eat their own, right? Because you got this, what I call, and I've heard others call, the progressive stack, right? So like you have all these groups like race, gender, sexuality, ability, things of that nature, where you were born, your religion, right? And again, we say one side's oppressor and the other side's oppressed. But which of those is the most important? Right now, it seems like race is above gender. So in other words, a black man's more of a victim than a white woman, right? But eventually, things come to loggerheads. So that's why they need to keep the coalition alive, because inevitably, if they start to look into it enough, they'll realize, like, wait a minute, this group's interests aren't directly aligned with mine. It's because we're all individuals. No one's interest is all aligned with anyone else. So when you're trying to group together on these immutable characteristics, things just go awry. Anyways, yeah, enough about transgender for today. A couple last things I want to talk about. Dan Crenshaw was a congressman. He ended up winning. He was a Republican who won in Texas. You might have heard of him. He has an eye patch. He was a war veteran. And this guy on SNL, I don't really watch SNL or know like any of the people's names on there anymore because it hasn't been funny since like Chris Farley and Adam Sandler. But yeah, there was this huge story because this guy on SNL made fun of him. Basically, I think the joke was something like, oh, yeah, here's a picture of this guy, and he had an eye patch, and he's like, yeah, believe it or not, he's not some, like, low-budget porn star or something like that, secret agent porn star or something like that, right? Now, first off, I thought that, like, it was absurd that people, like, you'll hear me rant on this a lot, like, dude, it's just a joke. If you didn't like it, okay, it was a joke. It doesn't mean the guy, is against all veterans or anything like that. I just didn't care. It's just like, okay, it was a joke. Maybe you thought it was in poor taste. He was trying to be funny. But granted, they're terrible at it. And I'll talk more about that. it's not edgy. It's safe comedy, like to make jokes like that. You know, that's where I get offended. I'm offended that comedy sucks now. That's where I'm at. I'm offended that SNL, man. I remember like staying home from school and watching Kids in the Hall and SNL like all day on Comedy Central. Like when I would stay home from school, it was the greatest. Like that influenced me a lot. Those comedians were hilarious. So, yeah, I am old. So it's a shame to me that it's not funny anymore. It's more concerned about being political than funny. But again, I don't think there was any reason to get up in arms about this joke. So anyways, this guy Crenshaw that was the butt of that joke came out and was like, I'm not seeking an apology, but you basically should like think of veterans. I thought his stance was really cool, right? It was like, yeah, that's pretty good. But I remember I told my wife, I was like, hey, you know what this guy should do? It would have been great publicity for him to actually go on SNL and kind of ham it up a little. And that's exactly what he did last Saturday. So the guy who made the joke, I forget what his name is, but he was like, yeah, I apologize. You know, this guy's a war hero, blah, blah, blah. And then Crenshaw comes out and kind of ribs the guy a little and's like, yeah, you know, happy Veterans Day. We should all come together and stop trying to be divisive. And it's an absolute, like, again, always looking at things two ways, like morally and strategically. Morally, it's great, right? He's absolutely right. Like, good for him for not, you know, for being able to be like, it was a joke. I can come on and laugh too, make fun of this other guy a little. That's great. Like, I really like that. I thought that was great. But strategically, that's so smart, right? Like, he comes off looking awesome. It's like, yeah, even left-wing people now would be like, maybe I wouldn't vote for this guy, but what a cool guy. He didn't, like, get a big chip on his shoulder. And I think if we strategically, if we start to do more things like that, like, for God's sakes, learn to laugh again, maybe we could all come together. Like, and I'll give you an example of someone. So there's this guy, he's a postmodernist, which if you've heard me talk, postmodernist is kind of the philosophical backing for like a lot of these identitarian politics that you see in like cultural Marxism. But his name's Slavoj Žižek, right? And I learned of this guy in debate. He's a really interesting guy. He's got a neat movie called A Pervert's Guide to Ideology. And what he does is he takes movie clips and then kind of in this really interesting way like inserts himself into the movie and talks about his idea of the philosophy behind it, right? So anyways, I saw this interview. By the way, I disagree with like 95% of what Zizek says, but I thought he was interesting to watch. If you can get by his weird accent, he's got a very like lispy accent. It's hard to follow him. But anywho, check that movie out if you ever get bored. Here's my big sale pitch for it. It's called A Pervert's Guide to Ideology. It used to be on Netflix, but you can probably find it online somewhere. My big sales pitch is the first movie that he kind of talks about the philosophy of is They Live, which is one of the greatest movies of all times. Stars Roddy Piper. It's just a fantastic movie. I think it was great. So, yeah, it's worth checking out. But anyways, I saw this interview with Zizek once where he's talking about, I forget exactly where he's from. I don't know. I'm just going to sound like a fool trying to come up with it. But a lot of other, let me backtrack. Let me say this. I've seen other comedians talk about this where it's like from different countries where they're like, it's funny because you get to the United States and race is such a big issue. But in reality, in other areas of the world, like things are so racially tinged. You could look at identical to the racial group you don't like. It's like literally like you just happen to be from the west of the country and we're from the east, so we hate each other, you know? So Zizek's like kind of talking about this. He meets someone who's like of a tradition, whatever his ethnicity is, traditionally clashed with his ethnicity, you know? And so, you know, they're like intellectuals or whatever, and they are piling around for a couple weeks doing like academic stuff and things of that nature. And so Zizek's like, one day he goes out and gets in the car after like a couple weeks, and this guy's basically like silent, and then he looks at them, and I'm not going to retell the joke, but he basically is like, let's just assume that Zizek's Slavic, and he's like, how to, like, okay, it's a crude joke, but he basically makes a joke that has to do with masturbation. He's basically like, how do Slavs masturbate? They dig a hole. They let someone dig a hole and then wait for the earth to rotate while they, put their thing in the hole. And because the joke is that the Slavs are super lazy, right? And Zizek starts laughing, and he's like, he understands at that moment of cultural importance because that was the icebreaker that let them know, like, yeah, we're friends. They made this kind of of crude, insensitive joke, and their ability to laugh at themselves, and then Zizek like makes a joke back to him that's equally crude. That breaks this tension, right? I think that's one of the reasons I love comedy, right? The more you could laugh at yourself and laugh at others, right, the less animosity there is if you learn to just kind of make fun of yourself. So I think that like things like that, like Crenshaw going on there, is absolutely fantastic. And you know, I guess a tip of the cap to the guy from SNL too that was willing to leave him come on and make fun of him somewhat too. So that, but what really choice did he have, because he had to try to save face. Anyways, yeah, that I just thought that was a neat thing. What I will say, and culture, right? Like I don't really care. It seems as if people want to jump on. Let me put it this way. Like, I like a lot of what I like in culture. Like I've said before, I'm kind of like a contrarian, right? So like when I was young, I was into metal music and then punk music and things like that. Like I was against what I thought the popular culture was at the time. Now it ends up being laughable, as everyone knows. But that was cool. Like that was edgy. There were the culture and then there was counterculture. And the problem I have today is like culture is totally dominated by the left. And so it's not edgy to then just be a part of that, right? So when SNL comes out and it's like, yeah, we're just going to keep bashing on Republicans, like that's not edgy, which is fine because you don't have to be edgy to be funny. But if you're not funny and you're not edgy, then what are you doing, right? And like they have this kind of like moral like superiority, like this intellectualism where it's like, yeah, we're edgy, you know, we're SNL, we went there, we went after Trump. Yeah, everyone goes after Trump. There's a great video you can find on YouTube of Norm Macdonald. He's actually with Roseanne, and I think it was from the reality show Last Comic Standing. And Roseanne and Norm were judges, right? And so if you haven't seen the show, which I never really have either, I just saw this YouTube clip, but the premise is basically, you know, it's like any of these cooking shows or whatever you see. You have start off with like 12 comedians, and then each week you eliminate one. So they'll have to do a set or whatever, and then the judges decide who stays and who goes. So this guy gets up on stage, and I believe like he just starts, I think he's gay, and he starts bashing the Bible, the Christian Bible, and he's just like, well, if you're going to quote from the Bible, then I'll quote from my book, my holy book, Harry Potter, you know. And he makes all these jokes where he's just bashing Christianity. And then Roseanne's like, yeah, I thought this was great, you know. And Norm's like, yeah, I didn't think it was funny at all. And everyone starts laughing because they think Norm's joking. And he's like, no, it's not edgy to bash Christianity. It's lazy. Everybody does it. In fact, it would be edgy to defend Christianity with comedy. And Norm is 100% right. Like, that's exactly how I feel. To the point where Johnny Rotten, who used to be in the Sex Pistols, right? I saw an interview with him, like, in the UK, where he's like, dude, to be punk now would be to defend Trump. Because all culture is against Trump. So if you want to be counterculture, you're like, yeah, I'll defend this guy then, right? And that's, like, how I feel. I think that it's gotten so ridiculous. One of my favorite bands was a band called the Drive-By Truckers, which I still really like them. Again, as I'm saying all this, as I said in my last video, I think that I just learned to swallow the pill and say, you know what, a lot of these groups I like, pretty much all of culture is dominated by the left, so if I ever want to consume any of culture, I'm just going to have to ignore their political stance or their ideological stance and enjoy the entertainment for what it is. So that's basically what I do. So when I'm complaining about band like the Drive-By Truckers, they're one of my favorite bands. They still are. I really like them. But, you know, they came out, like, they were kind of always just this kind of like a punk version of like folky bluegrass country music, right? Like, and just talking about how hard life would be, you know, to be someone who like lived in these rural areas and was a farmer and like lived in communities like that. And like, I identified with that. I thought it was cool because it's something you didn't hear a lot. And then when Trump got elected, you know, now they're singing songs about Charlottesville and how racist Trump is and how the wall's a bad idea and things like that. And it's like, okay, man, good for you guys. How edgy. Right? Woo! You agree with everyone else in Hollywood. That's cool, right? And they're all hypocritical, by the way. Like, I've mentioned this before, too, right? Like, I remember being really into, like, going to Warped Tour and stuff and being really into punk music when they had put out albums like Punk Against Bush, George Bush, Warmonger. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm with you, you know? And then Obama comes in and he's bombing countries. He drops more bombs than Bush, He's overthrowing Libya, he's dropping bombs in Yemen, all these other countries, trying to overthrow Syria, right? Okay, where you at now? No effects, right? Where you at now, all you punk fans? Hey, Bruce Springsteen, right? You were rocking against Bush. Where are you now? We're silent for 4 years. Oh, we're silent for 8. Call us when a Republican gets elected. Then we'll get back on our high horse again. So, it's just laziness. I think that, like, all these cultural people that come out, and you saw it, like, before the midterms, like, oh, Taylor Swift comes out and endorses a Democrat. Oh, this person, Rihanna came out and endorsed Beyonce endorsed. It's like, yeah, we know. It's all Democrat. By the way, and this is how you can tell, like, it's clear. Like, you could look at Hollywood or the music industry and things, and you could see how left-leaning it was. And I'm sure you could also see the same with the media as well. But just in case you had any idea, like, look at how, like, almost every major newspaper also backs Democrats. One of the websites I like to go to for news is The Hill. thehill.com. I actually like them. They lean left-wing, but I think they're pretty fair on a lot of their stuff, on their just general news coverage. But they would, like, put up before the midterm, they would be like, Tallahassee paper endorses Democrats. Oh, 3 major newspapers in Iowa endorse Democrat. Like, there was a news story every day like that. It's like, yeah, that's not news now. We know. Yes, all the media is for the Democrats. Got it. We know that. That's not news. But they put it up there every day like this was a news story. So, I just thought that was funny. So, the last thing I had written down was, so I got back on Facebook. I dropped Facebook for like 5 years. I kind of explained this in my last video because I was putting my name in for jobs and stuff. I just don't care now. I have a good job, and like I said, I don't think I had anything too bad on Facebook or anything like that. But getting back into Facebook, I am such a moron when it comes to I don't understand, like, I don't know how social media or technology works. So the reason I got on Facebook was I was like, oh, well, if I'm trying to reach people through this YouTube channel, it's really hard to get subscribers and things like that. That's why I keep shilling out, hey, you guys should subscribe and recommend me to other people. Hey, I feel dirty even saying that. But anyways, it's hard to get, like, initially get subscribers. So I was like, oh, yeah, you have these built-in friends on Facebook. Maybe 1 or 2 of them would subscribe or whatever. So you go in there, and it's cool. I've talked to some old people that I haven't talked to in a while, so that was interesting. But right out of the gate, so because I put my Facebook channel on my YouTube or my Facebook page on my YouTube channel, I started to get friend requests from people I didn't know, and I was like, oh, this must just be someone. So you get the first one, and then all of a sudden it was like 4 or 5 more, and then I get like 20 people, and they're like from Morocco, and they're from all kinds of places, and I was like, wow, that's cool. I got people listening to me from all over, and it took my wife to be like, hey, you idiot, like, you're being scammed. Like, I had no clue. I just assumed, like, how cool is that? What, with those 8 people watching, it's not 8 people that I know in real life or that, from Above Top Secret or something that I talk to. No, it's just these random people from Morocco. Woo, that's awesome, Yeah, so such an idiot. I'm definitely going to be the person, giving money to a Nigerian prince when I'm an old man and then complaining about getting scammed and stuff. I can see that coming. So, yeah, I don't really have anything else written down to talk about. If anyone had anything, what's up, Big Berg? If anyone had anything that they wanted, like a news story or any questions they had about any of my stances real quick, I'd probably stay on for like another 10 minutes. So, if anyone has anything in the chat, let's see if I missed anything. Yeah, Me First and Gimme Gimmes is great, right? I still listen to them a lot. Yeah, Israel and Palestine, right? Like, yeah, you're right. They're fighting over religion. I had no idea how intense. Well, obviously you know how intense it is, but I ended up meeting someone, and like I won't get into too many specifics, but I met someone who was on like the Palestine side of that conflict, and I'll pick your brain. I don't care if I agree with you or not, and I was shocked at the amount of hatred towards Israel. And I'm not saying, like, I'm sure if I talked to someone who was on the Israeli side of that conflict that they would be just as intense about it, right? But, I was like, oh, well, even if you hate all the Israelis, a conflict could kill Israeli children. That would be bad. And this person told me, yes, but military service is compulsory in Israel, so every child you kill is just a future soldier. And like that really puts into perspective just how crazy like that conflict is, right? Like when you could justify killing children because it's just stopping more enemies in the future, right? That's a crazy situation. So, yeah, I mean, it's like yeah, and that's just it, right? Like, one of the things Ron Paul said, and you saw this a lot with our founding fathers, where it was like, trade agreements and relationships with everyone, alliance with none, right? And the reasoning for that was once you get into an alliance with someone, then their enemies are your enemies, right? And so you're beholden basically to, if they take bad actions, you basically have to have their back. Like, story about me, I got jumped at a frat once by like 12 people. It was beat pretty bad. It's not worth going into. It was just, I didn't think I did anything wrong. But anyways, I got beat up by this frat, right? And a couple years go by, and the frat ended up getting disbanded or whatever. But I run into this guy. And we're talking, and we hung out like 2 or 3 days. Seemed like a cool guy. And then somehow this story comes up, and he didn't show up for like a week or two. And then he shows up, and he had like a case of beer with him. And I'm like, hey, what's up? And he's like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that like I went to a different school, and I was in that same frat, like at a different school. And, you know, I feel really terrible. And I was like, oh, dude, it's water under the bridge. I'm not worried about it. You don't have to feel bad or whatever. And then we got to talking, and he was like, you know, the problem is like when you sign up for something like that, you're, you know, figuratively brothers with the people in this fraternity. So if there's one of them that's starting fights, even if they're in the wrong, you have to have their back, right? That's kind of what like alliances are. That's kind of like what an alliance with Israel is, right? So any bad action they take, we have to back them up. And we end up getting mired in this conflict, and it's like, we just have no business. Now, having said that, I think that culturally, the animosity towards Israel is way overblown, right? Like there seems to be, I guess, put it this way, supporters on both sides make it seem like only the other side does crappy things. And I don't think that's the truth. And we see, like in academia at least, that the pendulum is heavily switched towards Israel's always the bad guys, and it's nothing to have Hamas and these terrorist groups, people from them come to campuses. But if someone who wants to come from Israel and speak on behalf of Israel wants to come, they're basically shut down and things of that nature. And I think that's ridiculous. So I tend to lean towards more Israel's side on that, but I don't think that we should be getting involved at all. Like, it's not our business. And, you know, sadly, I think the AIPAC, which is kind of like the lobbying firm for the Israeli interest, they seem to have as much influence in our politics as any other lobbyist group, right? So when we're talking about Russian influencing the elections and things like that, it's funny how we only take certain countries and mention it, as if every civilized country isn't trying to have influence in our election, both in kind of illegal or shady ways through like possibly hacking and things of that nature, or having trolls post on Facebook. Like that was some kind of big deal. I can't believe people still buy that was a big story. But then they overlook like kind of what we consider legal lobbying practices and things of that also seek to influence our election. So it's like, why do we arbitrarily judge, right? We say, oh, Russia did it, it was bad. China will ignore. Israel does it, no big deal. You know, if Palestine would do it, it'd be a big deal, or whatever, right? So oh, okay, thanks. But yeah, that's my feelings in a nutshell on Israel and Palestine. Anything else anyone wanted to hear about? I can tell you, like, I put a video up. It's just a minute and a half long. I did get, if you weren't here at the beginning, I did get a new microphone ordered and a new camera. So hopefully the image quality and things like that will be better. I am in the process of trying to have a setup so I could have a person with me physically, right? Like, so two of us in the room and kind of do a back and forth or an interview. I want to get people, the next thing I'm going to try to do, right? There's two types of people I would love to have discussions with. People that disagree. Well, anyone, I guess, to start with. Even if you agree with me, I just think the dialogue works way better. I get tired of hearing me talking, so I can only imagine others do as well. But I really want to talk to people that disagree with me. I think that would be great. And I also want to talk to people that you don't hear from a lot, right? Like, so like my father-in-law is a truck driver, right? And he just started getting interested in politics. By the way, in the little area I live in, it's amazing how many people since Trump was running for office have become interested in politics. I know tons of people that never voted in their life, and now all of a sudden are voting or have an avid interest in politics and things of that nature. So that's one good thing that Trump brought about. And, you know, even though I disliked Obama, if Obama got people on the other end doing the same thing and taking an interest, that's great too. Now, if you're going to take an interest, try to like do your best to be somewhat informed. You know, there's nothing more annoying than seeing people running. I'm not saying I know everything anyway, so don't take this to be like I'm arrogant, but sometimes people don't know the very minimum and they're out there screaming that you're a crappy person because you don't agree with them. So, in fact, I'll give you an example of that. When I was in debate, right, like you would have people all the time, you'd be at these parties and people would be like, oh, you're a debater, let's debate. It's like, whatever. So I had this girl one time, she's at my house and she keeps saying that. Oh, let's debate, let's debate, let's debate. And I'm like, okay, finally, what do you want to talk about? And she's like, who did you vote for? Did you vote for Obama? I think this was 2008. And I was just like, or maybe it was 2010. I don't know. It was probably 2008. But I was like, no, I didn't vote for Obama. I voted for Ron Paul. And she's like, oh, you're a racist. You know, you're crappy. And I was like, well, actually, I was against the wars. And she's like, oh, well, what do you mean? Like, the Democrats didn't have anything to do with the war. And I was like, yeah, actually, a bunch of Democrats voted for the war in Iraq. And she's like, yeah, but Bush was the president. I was like, yeah, I get that, but the Democrats voted, you know, they were on board. And she's like, no, but Bush appointed all of Congress. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, all of Congress, because Bush was the president, those are all his people. And I was like, so you're telling me that like our 2 senators, all of our Congress people, those are all appointed by the president, we don't vote for them? She's like, yeah. And I was like, I didn't say it this politely. I used a couple of curse words, but I was like, okay, you need to leave my house right now. And I basically made her leave because I was like, you sat here haranguing me all night because you claimed to be intellectually superior to me and wanted to debate me, and you don't even know the very first thing about what you're trying to talk about. It would be like if I took my car to the shop, you know, and I was like, something's wrong with my car, and they come out and they're like, yeah, it's your transmission, and I was like, no, it's the magic fairy pixie dust. It's out of pixie dust. That's the problem. That mechanic's going to be like, okay, dude, time to move along, right? Like, it's just like, so, you know, if you're going to try to be informed, or if you're going to take an interest, try to be a little informed at least. You don't have to be a genius. You don't have to spend a bunch of time. But anywho, I'm rambling on here again. My father-in-law, he started watching the news and stuff a little. And, you know, I asked him, I was like, have you ever seen someone like you on the news, right? Have you ever seen anyone like you ever talking? And he's like, no. Like someone who's just a truck driver. Like politics affects him. Like politics affects us all to some extent. Now, in our general lives, life goes on no matter who gets elected, right? There's no need to get that upset. But, you know, particularly in some jobs, so like jobs that are heavily regulated, politics affects a lot. And a lot of those jobs happen to be jobs that are around the area I live in, like farming, truck driving, things of that nature. So, you know, as a truck driver, like he has a lot to say on regulations and things like that you don't hear. Maybe if you're really looking for it, you'll hear a spokesman from a truck driving industry talk. But how many times do you get to hear the actual driver talk, right? Like, well, what do you think about this? Even if they disagree with me, like, I just think it's absolutely fascinating to listen to people from different backgrounds and different careers discuss this stuff. Because all we ever hear is from, like, professional media and politician types. Like, who cares? I want to hear from other real people, you know? Not to say that those people aren't real, though you wonder sometimes, right? But you know what I mean? So I'm trying to have, people like that, you know, and hopefully I'll have them come on. He particularly has a lot to say about these new electronic driving logs, all these regulations. It's a mess. Like, it just goes to show you. And I've talked to local farmers, like the regulations they'll talk to you about. It's just absolutely crazy. So, yeah, thanks, Big Berg. Yeah, so if no one's got anything else here, I'm going to be heading out then. Thanks for sticking with me, everyone. And yeah, please, if you haven't subscribed and please do that. And yeah, if you know anyone who might be interested in hearing from me or might want to make fun of me or anything of that nature, feel free to let them know as well. So yeah, I should be putting some more videos up. I'm going to try to live stream Fridays, probably during the day. So look forward probably around noon on Fridays. I'm going to try to start live streaming every week. Hopefully my new equipment will be in by then. So, and if you ever have an interest in that was one last thing I wanted to say. That's the live discussions I hope to be having with people like face to face. But I'm still trying. If someone would be interested in talking to me like during a live stream or pre-recorded video, if you would prefer it, and I don't know if you have to use Google Hangout or what kind of system we would have to set up to be able to get that to work. But if you're interested in that, just contact me on here, a comment section, or my email or whatever. Or if you're on Above Top Secret, my name is Grambler on there. You could hit me up there. And yeah, I would love to talk to people like that online. We can get it worked out. So, all right, everyone, thanks for being with me. Have a good one.